here to present Elisa Massi and Lorenzo Vannucci. They are both from Sorbonne University, from two different labs. Elisa Massi is a PhD student in Computational Neuroscience and Robotics at the Institute of Intelligent System and Robotics at Sorbonne, as we said. And prior to her PhD, Elisa received the Bachelor of Science in Automation Engineering at the University of Bologna, in collaboration with the Tongji University of Shaghai. Very international also the master, because she has a Master of Science in Bionics Engineering at Sant'Anna School of Advanced Studies in Pisa, in collaboration with the Technical University of Denmark. Our current research focuses on data-driven behavioral modeling of spatial exploration and on studying the role of the hippocampal replay in navigation and learning, and how to transfer those principles from neuroscience to reinforcement learning and eventually to robotics. Lorenzo Vannucci is a postdoctoral fellow at the Institut de la Vision at Sorbonne University, and he obtained the PhD in biorobotics at Sant'Anna School of Advanced Studies in Pisa as well, and his master in computer science at the University of Pisa. His current research activity involves the development of event-based algorithms for sensory processing. And Lorenzo is also on the job market. Am I right? Okay. So in their spare time, Elisa enjoys playing Chinese board games like Mahjong, while Lorenzo customizes his prompts and develops pet projects, such as programs to automate daily activities, software libraries, and games. So I give them the floor, and thanks again for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you, Silvia.
Yeah, very accurate, Silvia. Thank you.
Okay.
This? Yes. Okay.
It's already like this?
Yes.
Okay.
Can you see the screen? Right. Okay. Okay. Give you the floor.
Perfect. So thank you so much, Silvia, for the kind words of introduction, and thank you all for inviting us to this great great event of Tokyo Robotics. So I will start this presentation, which is the title "Animals and Human Brain Mechanisms for Robotics." Let's take a look at the outline that we have prepared for you. So at the start, I will give a brief introduction on why we would like to use animals and human brain models on robots. What's the whole point of doing this, which is something that it really relates to the field of neurorobotics, research field of neurorobotics. And after that, we will show one example each of these techniques, let's say. From my side, I will talk about event-based sensor fusion. So it's a sensor fusion, but from a radically different point of view, let's say. We will see after. And then Elisa will talk about reinforcement learning and replay techniques in reinforcement learning for spatial navigation. Well, at the end, we will have some take-home messages for you, and we'll start the discussion. So starting from the motivation, why we would like to use these brain models, brain model techniques for robots. Well, let's say that robots, as they are now, are I would say they are quite smart. There have been a lot of advanced in our robots, can behave and can learn from the world. But maybe they're not as smart as we would like them to be. That's the problem, because robots still have some big issues in the selection and processing of perceived information. So meaning that they cannot really perceived well the world and make, let's say, internal models, predictions about what's going to happen, or what's happening, or what's going to happen depending on their action. And they're not too much able to optimize their past experience to learn more rapidly, meaning that they need to redo the same action many times, probably a wrong action many times before learning how to do a correct one. Instead, animals and humans, of course, are pretty smart, because these robots cannot turn a valve, but a cat can open a door, for instance. Even probably nobody taught the cat how to do it. So it is pretty smart. And but what makes animals and humans, of course, so smart? I would say it's a combination of two factors. So for one side, we cannot avoid talking about our bodies, because our bodies are for sure something that contributes to our intelligence, so especially with the interaction with the environment. So our bodies are capable of making assumption, perceiving the world with different sensors, very smart sensors. And we also have smart actuators that allow us, yes, to perform actions, but in some compliant way, like this cat. There are a lot of cats in this presentation that perceive that is falling and is able to land on his feet and without breaking his legs because of the compliant actuation. So there's a lot of intelligence in our body, but it's not too much the topic of this talk. It's a whole new topic, very interesting topic. You can look at embodied intelligence and things like that. But of course, what we are more interested in is our brain. Our brain and our nervous system makes us smart, because even this cat could not do this landing, perform this landing without the brain. So without something that connects sensors to actuators, and in this case, probably via some reflexes or with some fast pathways. So of course, our brains are the major source of intelligence, brain and the nervous system. And the idea is to exploit these, to take inspiration from our brains or our nervous system to create to put some intelligence on your robot. So the idea is a bit of this field, neurorobotics, is to somehow give brains to bodies, in a sense. So what does it mean? It means to start from neuroscientific theories, for instance, theories like how we do sensory motor coordination, how we perform locomotion, how we are able to navigate, and to create some models of these neuroscientific theories that can be implemented on robots, something like via techniques that use optimal control, some internal models, some primitives. Moreover, this is not only a one-way, let's say, influence, so from neuroscience to robotics, but we can go also the other way around, because these theories can be, in a sense, proved on a physical embodiment. So it's also interesting to implement these theories on a physical embodiment, on a body, to say, okay, this theory works, so I actually give something back to neuroscience a bit, or more or less validate this theory. In practice, how does it work a bit? Well, I more or less say that we start usually from a neuroscientific model that is being translated in algorithm. The algorithm that it's integrated usually in some robotic controller, and usually we employ machine learning techniques to implement the learning mechanisms that are occurring in our brain. So this, for instance, is an example from a paper from my previous lab. It's an implementation of it's a very direct implementation of a circuit for the vestibulocortical reflex.
Okay.
just talking, but okay. So as I said, we are going to talk about two examples of this new robotic in action. From my side, we'll talk about this event-based sensor fusion. As I say, it's a model of sensor fusion that somehow relates to how we process images in the visual cortex. And it's based on a new kind of camera. They're called even cameras. And Elisa will talk about this reinforcement learning for replay in navigation. So how we can use reinforcement learning to create a smart models for spatial navigation that includes something that is similar to the replays that are happening in the hippocampus, and it is also validated on real data. Okay, so I will start with my example. First, I would like to introduce you to the world of event-based computation with event-based vision, most of all, which is a radically different way of processing information. The main motivation behind this event-based computation, event-based vision, is that the animal eyes work in a different, in a very different manner from conventional cameras. I think everybody knows more or less how a camera works. When you record a video, you are recording a sequence of frames. So it's just a simple sequence of images. But actually, the retina doesn't work like that at all. In the retina, we have a set of cells that respond to the light in a manner. And so the output that comes out from the retina, they're not images, it's just a sequence of neural activations from these cells in the retina. So it's something completely different, but still we are able to perceive the world pretty well. And so for this, there's been, in let's say recent, in the last 10 something years, maybe more, some efforts to mimic these natural visions, these retinal visions, by means of these new sensors, the new vision sensors, that are still cameras, like the one that is shown here. They look like normal camera, but they are very different in the sense that each pixel works asynchronously and autonomously from each other. So each pixel is autonomous in detecting the luminance, the light that's coming to him, and it doesn't record the value of the light, but only when it detects a change in this light, positive or negative, it emits an event saying something from my point of view has happened. So each pixel say at this time there was a light change, a significant light change. This leads to the new sensors that have a very low latency in the order of the microseconds. And so they can generate millions of these events per second. And to perhaps show a bit better what's happening, is in this case, for instance, imagine that you have a disk on which a black point is drawn that is turning. And we compare what happens between a standard camera and an event-based camera. So for a standard camera, well, it's what you imagine. We have a sequence of images. But for the event camera, also called dynamic vision sensor, we have a stream of event. Where each event has the position and the time. Interesting thing is that if the disk is not turning, we still have frames in the standard camera, but we don't have any information on the event side because there is no light change. So it's also a way to compress the information. And when the camera is moving, when the disk is moving too fast, on the camera side, we have effects such as motion blur, but on the event-based side, we just have more events. So let's say the information remains sharp in a sense. Okay, so we established that we have a completely different input, data as an input. How do we process it? We process this stream of events with event-based algorithms. Event-based algorithms are algorithms that usually work event by event. So they take an event, they do something, and they produce another event as an output, probably changing something. In particular, I would like to talk about this argument that is called HOTS, that stands for hierarchy of time surfaces. In this algorithm we have different layers. Each layer works on event by event, and each layer computes something. It changes only the polarity of event. So what is the polarity? An event, as I said, has the time, a position, pixel position in the camera, but also as a polarity that at the first layer indicates whether the change in luminance was positive or negative. And then this information changes after the first layer. So what does it do inside? Inside the HOTS layer, we have two components. At first, there is a spatial temporal decay. So starting from the event, we compute this time surface, which is nothing but a matrix at the end. That's I will explain later what it is. And then this time surface is clustered via a clustering algorithm. And the index of the cluster to which this time surface belongs becomes the new polarity that goes out from this specific layer. The time surface, which is the key a bit of this algorithm, is somehow a representation of the spatial temporal context that surrounds each event. What does this mean? This means that, so starting from each event, we create a time context. What's the time context? Is simply the last time in which an event has occurred in a certain pixel position. So when a new event occurs, we take its neighborhood, spatial neighborhood. So a series, a smaller matrix basically of spatial neighborhood, and then we apply decay function. We apply decay function as a way to somehow give more importance to more recent events that are occurring. At the end, we have this matrix that can be visualized like this, because it's always between 0 and 1. And such a matrix, it's telling us that there were a lot of events on the upper right part of recent events, so on the upper right part of the neighborhood, and no events on the rest. So maybe maybe there was a corner moving, because these time surfaces somehow gave us an indication of what happened in the last in this spatial temporal context. So for instance, these time surfaces have some typical stereotypical, let's say, shapes, depending on what happened on the input stream, in which we can, for instance, distinguish things such as line moving in different directions, or corners, or things like that. So these things, the actual stereotypical, let's say, feature is found by the clustering algorithm. So each layer has this clustering algorithm that somehow automatically extract these stereotypical features. So at the end, what happens is that in a layer is that an event arrives, this time surface is computed, and then we can say, okay, this time surface is closer to this feature. That means, so it's a corner, or it's a line, it's a diagonal line, it's a horizontal line. This especially for the first layer. Then of course, what we do is put multiple layers. In each layer, we increase both the size of the spatial neighborhood and the number of clusters that we can, so the number of features that we can recognize in the specific layer. So that's why at the end it's a hierarchical model that can recognize interesting visual feature in such a stream of events. After we pass the events through through all these layers, what we can do is we can do different things. A typical thing is to count, for instance, how many times each prototype, each cluster has been activated during the stream of events. So at the end, we can say during the stream of events, I saw 10 corners, 12 lines moving in this direction, and so on and so forth. In all of these, we said where is the bio-inspiration for the camera part, which is more akin to the body, the intelligence in the body. But where is the bio-inspiration in the algorithm? Well, I spoiled it a bit at the beginning. It's coming from the visual cortex. Well, even the retina itself, most important, the visual cortex, because actually the output of the retina are ganglion cells that are already responding to a certain pattern in their spatial neighborhood. So this is already something that's it's similar to the features that we can extract with HOTS. And after this ganglion cell, that is the last stage of the retina, we have the visual cortex that actually puts together this spatial neighborhood to create more and more complex features in its 4 layers, I think. So that's a bit of the inspiration. What happens after the visual cortex? Well, the idea is that at least what we know from brain theory is that all of the sensory signals are somehow merged in the brain, most probably in the parietal cortex. And the idea is that these sensory information that are at the beginning very different, because the sensors are very different, can be merged thanks to the common representation that is the spike, basically the brain activity. So for every sensor, it's somehow translated into brain activity, and the brain activity being more or less the same among all these can be merged together. This led us to the idea of fusing different modalities, using events as a representation of the different sensory inputs. So for the camera, from the event-based camera, they're already like this. We can apply HOTS and have something similar to the visual cortex. But we can do the same actually also for other sensors. We just need a way to convert them, if they're not event-based, into events. And after that, we can somehow fuse with a special, slightly different layer in HOTS. Finally, I would like to show an example of what we can achieve with this fusion, HOTS fusion. It's something that we did is to perform some classification of container filling classes, meaning that we recorded this data in which we had 3 containers, 3 boxes, things with different visual features, where inside we put 3 different fillings that produce different sounds. So for a total of 9 possible combinations. And we recorded several sequences for each class. And then, so in this sequence, we were simply shaking the container with the filling inside. And then we applied the fusion scheme with the camera and the microphone, so visual and audio fusion. And at the end, as I say, we took the histogram of activation and used a very simple multi-layer perceptron to perform a classification. And we find out that while, yes, both the audio and the camera alone are quite good at recognizing the container or the filling, clearly the camera is better recognizing the container and the microphone is better recognizing the feeling. But we can, with the fusion, basically have both of their accuracies together and also recognize the combination of the two. Also recognize the combination of the two in a manner that is even better than just taking the two histograms from both sides and concatenating them together, which would be the classic way of performing fusion. So we are actually creating some features that are more intelligent than not just something coming from the two sides put together. So the combination of the two is better. So to conclude on my side, I think I showed that event-based computation is a radically new approach to computing that can be powerful thanks to its high temporal resolution. And events can be used as a common sensory representation. That was the key thing, which also allows to perform non-trivial tasks such as classification. And of course, there are also some bad things in this event-based world, mostly that there are still not many algorithms. And these event-based cameras produce a lot of data that our normal computer architecture are not good at processing yet. We should use something that is more similar to the brain, some computer architecture more similar to the brain, but it is not available yet, I would say. So, okay, this concludes my part. I will leave the floor to Elisa.
Okay, I will continue the presentation from here, talking about how we can take the inspiration for processing the information that we perceive from the environment that animal and human has in their memory. So for this, it's important to know that the hippocampus, that is the part of the brain that you see in the picture deep inside the cortex, has been recognized since 1948 to be important for a cognitive map in different dimensions. So for cognitive map related to spatial context, temporal, or also associational context. But what we are interested in studying for my research is the spatial context, and in particular, that's also one of the topic that is mostly associated with the hippocampus. And as you can see in the picture taken from this paper, we can see in the different square the activity, in particular, and the firing rate of different neurons that are called in the place cell in the hippocampus that signal and fire for specific location in the environment. And so you see that the different cells are really showing a preference for firing when the animal, in this case, is in a particular area of the maze, and their distribution in the end seems to cover almost the entire space that the animal has experienced. Starting from the study of hippocampus, one of the most important phenomena happening there for learning and spatial information processing is called hippocampal replays. So hippocampal replays are self-generated neural sequences of the activity of the place cell you have seen before in the slide. And just to give you an example of how they work, in this figure you see in blue is like the position covered by the rat during the experiment. So it's basically following one corridor, so one forward corridor. So when it's following the corridor, particular place cells are firing depending on the particular area that is covering the maze, as shown before. But once it has finished to cover the corridor and it stays in that particular place, we see that if we zoom in, we have like the activity of this file cell playing backward, but really 10 times or such a scale faster than what has been playing before. So I can. No, okay. Okay. So as I said before, in the hippocampus, these place cell and replay are particularly happening CA1 and CA3. And in recent literature, this phenomenon has been studied and analyzed to happen also not just in backward order as an example, but also forward order or in random order. And the main assumption coming from this is that they are really important for memory consolidation and learning processing regarding spatial tasks. So how can we integrate this phenomena in neuroscience in artificial intelligence, finally in robotics? What we are doing at the moment, and many groups are also doing, is try to integrate this phenomenon in reinforcement learning. As just give a short explanation of reinforcement learning, even if I think many of you know already what I'm talking about. So reinforcement learning is a branch of AI where learning is happens through interaction with the environment. So we have a particular agent interacting with the environment, for example, in a spatial task. And the way of interacting is the agent do an action in the environment, and it's depending on the reward he got from doing this action and the next state in it ends up. He can learn a certain policy, so a certain behavior that will make him maximize the future reward through this trial and error processing. So we have this nice GIF to show the example. So this is the agent blue trying to learn how to get to the green point, avoiding the red one at the very beginning of the learning phase. So it's really trying to go everywhere in the maze. But then in the final part, he discovered the best policy, so the best behavior to go to the point, and it's really fast to do the task he has to do. And so how replay can be integrated in these reinforcement learning strategies is not something that is like out this year, but even that before the time that replay were studying in deep in neuroscience, there were already groups that integrate experience replay in reinforcement learning algorithm, showing speed up in learning performances. And we will divide this type of replay into main groups. Memory reactivation, when the replay regards just the experience that the agent really had. And then we have other kind of, let's say, RL replay that are called model-based or simulation reactivation, when the knowledge about the interaction between agent and the world is used to perform this reactivation. In particular, so as I was just saying, we will distinguish between model-free replay, so replay technique that doesn't know how the transition model and the reward model between interaction agent and environment. And we will test in the example I will show you, for instance, the Q-learning agent. And then regarding model-based techniques, so technique that use the knowledge and about the transition model and the reward model, we call them model-based and replay and simulation reactivation. And in particular, we will show example regarding a prioritized sweeping learner. So a learner that's also replay the past activity based on the level of surprise that this experience has got to the agent. So just to make maybe a visually clear example. So if this one is the trajectory that an agent has followed to go to the circle to the star, and he has updated the value of the state with this black state you see here, we can see two examples. We can see the example of how a backward, how model-free replay behaves. So they propagate in a wider way in the environment, the Q value, and also replaying the entire trajectory. In particular, the backward replay is focusing on replaying really the states close to the reward. And on the other side, prioritize sweeping, not knowing the model of the word and knowing which state are more relevant or more surprising for the agent, just to replay the last few steps that are more selectively important for the task. So I will going to present two examples that we did to investigate which replay strategy of RL can be can be better in depending on the task, on the experiment we want to do for arriving finally to a robotic experiment. So the first things we did, we tried to simulate a task that has been studying and done a lot in neuroscience for studying spatial navigation. So in this task, it's called Mori water maze task. So we have a rat that needs to reach an either platform in a pool with opaque water. So the mouse is not able to see directly the platform, but you know that once it is here, the experimentalist take the mouse out of the water. So it's like a positive conditioning for him. So during the first day, it's taking a long way to get to the point, but then finally after training, it's able to get to the point really fast. We replicate a similar task on Gazebo, so simulating the Turtlebot 3 robot in a circular arena and performing a division of discretization of the space autonomously by the robot walking in the space. And also we simulate the dynamicity of the task by changing the reward position in the middle of the experiment to test which replay strategy is better, even in case of dynamical task. So I show you the result about this experiment. So we tried the type of replay I showed before. So no replay, 2 model-free replay, backward and random, and the model-based prioritized whipping strategy. We can see from this graph that in all the replay strategy here are faster to learn a shortest paths to go to the reward compared to the no replay case. But at some point, due to the fact that they really reinforce the knowledge that they had, the path they got to go to the reward can be some optimal one with respect to the one from the no replay agent that instead is exploring more. And we try the same experiment with in the same environment, but this time the model of the word, so the transition probability to go from one state performing a certain action to the same state as one, depending on the probability that the robot really experienced during the simulation on Gazebo. In this case, we see that the difference of performance between the algorithm is less evident than before. But we have we noticed that the model-based strategy, in particular, after that we changed the reward position, are faster to learn compared to all the other strategy, and also the path that they get in the end is not more suboptimal compared to the no replay one, but still it's like the best and significantly different from the other replay strategy, meaning that when we got closer to realistic conditions, so when the interaction robot environment is more stochastic, model-based strategy are needed to face more rapidly this issue and to solve the task. To understand better what was happening, we were looking at how with what kind of replay happens for the agent. So I show me here the propagation of the Q value in grayscale and the trajectory the wire replay in rainbow scale. And we see as the first things, the difference between the propagation of Q value in the case that we have all kind of replay. So since the trial one, the propagation is really wider, of course, compared to the no replay case. And we can also notice a difference between the model-based strategy with prioritization, that it's really selective in doing replay at the very beginning, but then if the task is not changing, no more replay are needed. So let's say it's more selective in this way, maybe more computationally costly at the beginning, but then more efficiently later. And also when we change the task at trial 26, we see that model-based replay are again needed to compensate within the change of the task. And the same things we analyze for the stochastic case, and we see that in this case, more replay compared to the deterministic one are needed to learn. And in this case, we also see that due to the stochastic nature of the environment, also the Q value are propagating more, and these allow also for a better generability of the task. So now let we do a step a bit further to get closer to real robotics. So we try to, starting from this other work, did the same in the lab by Remy Dromel, we used let's say interaction robot and a function that mapped the interaction robot environment that was directly recorded on the real robot. And we just to check the level of entropy and confusion that we have on the two tasks, we see that before the level of entropy was more homogeneous and less, let's say, uncertain. Like in this case of the real task, the entropy it's very different and also critical in certain point. And due to the fact that also in a more recent theory, the coexistence of two kind of strategies in the brain has been assumed. The fact that we are alternating between model-based and model-free strategy, so strategies that are more useful to perform habitual behavior as strategies that are instead more important to perform goal-directed behavior. Starting from the same work I've cited before, we are integrating some replay mechanism starting from the work that Remy Dromel did. So we this work is basically using a meta controller that's at each action, that when an action needed to be taken, it chooses between two aspects, one model based and one model free and one model based, and based on the memory of what this agent performed previously, so that how much time did they take to take a decision and how certain they were about this decision, the meta controller gives like the control of one of the two aspects. And then we add two strategy of replays on top of it to see if this can even improve the performance of this controller. So our result here show that if we test first a pure model-based or model-free agent to see how they perform in this way when we added replay. So in regarding model-based agent, they were really good in learning, that accumulating the reward, but their computational cost was really expensive. And that's also when adding replay, we still keep in a condition that's where the cost is expensive. And then looking at what's happening if we use just a model-free agent, we can see that here the cost is really reduced, but the performance are like not as good as with the model-based. And so with the controller proposed before, that choose between model-based and model-free strategy, we can get a, let's say, a performance, a trade-off between performance at cost that is the closest to the optimal point when we add replay, because the yellow point is the point starting point when we don't have any replay. So at the previous paper, but when we also have the replay, we have a point that is really closer to the optimal point compared to the other tested strategies. And what we are doing as ongoing work now is also trying to perform the learning phase on the real robot with this new Turtlebot 3. And in particular, trying to implement the replay phase also when the robot is going back to the starting position, that it's a really, let's say, good time because the robot is not doing any further computational thinking. Just to close the loop about how we can instead use robotics or artificial intelligence to validate hypotheses we have about learning and behavior in animals and humans. One part of my PhD is also regarding modeling mice behavior. So just to look at, we have some data thanks to a collaboration with Karim Benchenan Lab. And we can see that our first aim is first to study and model the free exploration behaviors of mice. That's in, I cannot go to much detail here, but we model through a value-based framework when safety, biomechanical cost, and previous experience matter for the agent to decide where to go next. But our hypothesis is then to study how they learn to avoid a particular negative conditioning that they have here, because this learning that they perform really with very few real experience allow the mice to get to really have a strong behavior and to learn to avoid a place in the maze where they were not happy, let's say. So our hypotheses were if the level of punishment is anyhow related to the level of distress that to the level of replay that the mouse need to learn the task. So we use a simple Q-learning agent, and then we optimize for the agent the possibility to do also offline replay after the task to better propagate what the agent has learned. And so simulating our agent, our model predict that for the mice, you see that were more exposure to the punishment during the task, our model predict that they need more experience replaying offline to get to the same occupancy of the maze that you see in the previous slide. And so this is a first useful hypothesis that we can have from our model. And yeah, so this is another possibility that we can have in integration of robotics and neuroscience. So finally, to get to the conclusion of this part, we can see from this experiment that we usually integrate to replace strategy in reinforcement learning. We are faster to learn, and this is crucial for real robotics to save experimental time and battery. We also see that usually model-based replace strategy perform better, in particular in dynamic scenario. And that when we are getting close to realistic scenario, an integration between model-based and model-free, it's the best also to decrease the computational cost needed to perform this decision. And finally, I'm sorry if I was really fast of that example, maybe we can discuss about it later. We thought that using this model, it's in artificial intelligence, RL and robotics can be useful for test and validate hypotheses in neuroscience. So just to conclude, a few general take-home message from our talk. So neurorobotics can be a good approach to solve robotic perception and learning tasks. And also looking at the brain, we can discover and design new models for computation. And also why we want to look at biology also, because these brain and body were already optimized by an evolution and times to be selective and to minimize the energy cost for performing specific tasks. And finally, we can use also neurorobotics to test and validate neuroscientific hypotheses. This is still a long way and a lot of research to do to get to have this neurorobotics perception algorithm and integration and processing algorithm on physical platforms. And so there still a lot to do to really bridge the reality gap and use this algorithm on real platform. So we want to thank all our labs in ISIR and Institut de la Vision, also our supervisor in particular, and also the people in the lab that help us, and the collaborator and everybody that contributed to the work in Talking Robotics for inviting us, and you for listening. So thanks for your attention, and now we are open for discussion and question if we have time. We hope so.
Thanks a lot for the talk. It was great. I think we took a bit more time because having two people, it's there's someone with the speaker on. Okay, I think it's fine. So there is a question from Mura. Mura asked me to speak because he cannot at the moment. Okay. So he is complimenting you. He said fantastic talks, thank you. And Lorenzo's talk reminds me of a quote from Nietzsche: there is more intelligence in your body than in your best wisdom. And by emphasizing intelligence in the body, And to reverse this quote and the first part of the talk, he would like to ask, are there any cognitive applications for event cameras, such as binocular rivalry? I don't know how to pronounce it properly, but I can, you know, okay.
No. No, I mean, not that I'm aware of. I mean, honestly, there are quite a few applications with binocular vision that I know of. They are mostly related to usual stuff, so the tracking, distance estimation, this kind of thing. And I'm not aware of anybody doing cognitive, sort of cognitive models, studies using event-based camera. So, no, especially this particular experiment, no.
Ura, do you have any follow-up? You can write in the chat if you, okay. Yeah, because indeed, I think, okay, he said, thank you, but he put it in the chat. So you could see. I think it's hard to have some cognitive applications starting from that, because there is a difference from like try to replicate a narrow scientific phenomena and a cognitive phenomenon. I think it's a different level, right? So I think that's, yeah. I mean, it's more on like, how do you behave with respect to certain biological structure, and the biological structure itself, isn't it?
Yeah, and also you are constrained. You are constrained a lot on the techniques that you can use due to the data that you have. So with event-based, you can only use event-based. I mean, you can also somehow take the events and create a sort of frame, but then you lose everything. So it's not worth it. So yeah, the fact that you can only use event-based algorithms, and there are very few of them at the moment, somehow I think limits what you can do, cannot do. So I think going towards this cognitive level is a step further.
Yeah, I agree. Is there any other question? Please raise your hands if you have. We'll take just one more, because we are already out of time. But I invite everyone to also join our Slack channel. If you have a question that... So if there are no questions at the moment, I have many. Actually, I wrote too many questions before, but I will ask them in the Slack channel. I will just ask one to Elisa, so that we have... So you talk about this meta controller in the last work you have done, and I was wondering if the addition of the meta controller was inspired by some existing brain system that mediates this type of function, or if the meta controller came after, I don't know, and understanding some of the things that you explored with reinforcement learning.
Yeah, no, also the fact that there is a sort of, I wanted to go back to the slide. Oh, okay. Yeah, also the meta controller, yes, it corresponds to, in fact, something that is happening in the brain. So the changing between the selection between these two strategies is modulating within the brain. So depending on if as particular, depending if a particular context is certain or uncertain, we can switch between two strategies that the model free in a way model the fact that is more adaptive, it's more habitual, so it's less computationally costly. And instead when the decision is not is uncertain. What is used is another strategy it's much more computational, more conscious, that needs to retrieve knowledge we need to retrieve more consciously about what we need to do next. So yeah, this is more. I can also like send you the detail for the corresponding exactly part of the brain modeling in this as I say in this graph, but it's basically the alternation between the habitual strategy and the strategy that is more goal oriented is performing in the brain. So it's it's something that is not let's say this is also something that is bio-inspired, so it's not how to say build
on top of it,
or build in particular for this topic. Of course, it's difficult to say exactly which structure it is, because it's really when you model at such a high level, and so you are not modeling neurons or plasticity, it's really difficult to say to what the meta controller corresponds to, what the model free ESPER corresponds to. And so as maybe also connected to the question that was asked before, that if we can, it will imply to have knowledge about everything, all the level of the brain, at how all the level of the brain works, to really have, to say, event-based model that really replicate biological data and also perform cognitive tasks. So this is, I think, is the most challenge, and that's why in neurorobotics we try to do model at different levels. So what Lorenzo did is more lower level, so more more inspired to the spiking nature of neurons, and the reinforcement learning is more inspired to behavior. So it's but really to understand that it will be great to have at some point in this research a model that can do both, like all the level cognitive and also explaining the biological data.
Yes.
Let's do one thing at a time.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So thanks once again. If there are other questions, please join our Slack channel. I have to share my screen again to introduce our next session. And okay, let me introduce our next session. So our next session will be on the 22nd of June, and we will have Theodore Summers and Mark Ho from Computational Cognitive Science Lab. So if people are interested on a computational model of cognition, this is a good occasion to talk about this, and they are from Princeton University. We have this break because we have some conferences in the middle, and so we decided to not overlap with them. But it was very nice to see you all. We take again the occasion to thank the sponsor for supporting us, and yes, hope to see you all next session. And thanks again, Elisa and Lorenzo, for today's talk.
Yeah, thank you.